I have to figure out everything about who this person is so that I know what order to put things in.
We are learning how to get into our characters' heads when we write. Last week we mentioned that we're going to be doing some scenes from the opening chapter of our book, starting to write those. And it definitely is just starting to write those, and we have a long way to go before even just those scenes are how we want them to be. And part of what we want to improve on is being able to get into our characters' heads for those specific scenes. And that's one of the challenges in introducing characters, is you've got to know the character well before you can introduce them to your reader. And it makes it especially difficult, at least in my opinion, I think it makes it more difficult when that scene is almost entirely inside the character's head. For both of ours, the scene is that way, where it's almost completely inside the character's head, and there's not a whole lot going outside of their own thoughts.
And we still want to be able to hook the reader and get them engaged, and not just not just get lost inside the person's brain, but also we need to be able to introduce them to other things that are going on. In the scene that I put together, what I found as I was working through it, I noticed that I began to kind of interweave things like the posture that Vanessa was using, how she was sitting, and that meant something to how she was feeling. So explain how she was feeling led to describing how she was thinking, and then how she was thinking had reasons that were related to her backstory. So I found that I ended up kind of interweaving all of those different things, the doing, the thinking, the backstory, and kind of surprised myself that, wow, this turned out better than I thought it was going to for a second draft for that part.
And that's something that I may need to borrow when I do my second draft, because I felt like I was almost explicitly on just what he was thinking, very little on what he was doing, very little backstory, and it just felt weak. So including some of that might help strengthen that opening scene there. But one of the things that we're kind of changing our expectations on is the level of quality where we want from our, at least short term, the level of quality we want from our writing. And we're no longer expecting like the fourth draft level quality. We're going to be doing a few drafts, but we also recognize that there are some things that are going to be best left for later on in the book.
And you're talking about as we're focusing on scene by scene writing during this stage. So we can finish a scene with second draft quality before we move on to the next scene, rather than saying we've got to keep polishing and polishing and polishing a scene.
Right. And I think for my issue, especially, of getting into the character's head, and for me, the challenge was understanding how my character, Arnold, how he processes information. One of the things that I found while I was looking back over the scene that I had written and discussing it with you is that I was writing the scene in the way that I would process it as the author, knowing things that I know that Arnold himself doesn't know. And because he doesn't know these things, and because he thinks a specific way, this is not the order in which he would process this information. The stuff that would stick out to the reader, the stuff that would stick out to me as the author, because I know it's important later on in the story, to him it's not very important. It just feels normal. And that wouldn't be the first thing that he thinks about when this scene occurs. And so if I'm going to get into my character's head, I need to figure out how is he going to process this information, and then I can write it correctly. And that's an early draft issue, because it
meaning what?
Meaning it's one of those things that is, when we talked earlier about not having that fourth draft quality yet. This is one of those things that occurs earlier. It's before that fourth draft quality. It's an early draft issue. We need to get this fixed so we know what the scene even looks like. It changes the entire structure of the scene rather than just kind of fine-tuning some of the wording or things like that.
And I think there may be part of that, where obvious things like what you're describing, that what he knows and what he doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
As we get later in, I think there may be other areas where similar kinds of challenges will come up. Where think about the structure, where there still may be later draft issues, because as we write, we will learn more about how the character thinks. So there's a lot we don't know about the character.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a danger that we could get caught up in, I have to figure out everything about who this person is so that I know what order to put things in. That may not necessarily be true.
Right. But I think when we have an idea, a very strong idea of they would definitely think of this before that, that's something that we should definitely take into account as much as possible beforehand. But like you said, don't get hung up on all the details.
And that's my tendency, is I have to get this polished and perfect with everything that I know yet.
Mm-hmm.
One of my issues right now that I've noticed that I've been challenged with is about the vocabulary that the character would use. And I think that is one of those early or later draft issues. Mm-hmm. I found myself, there's often this line between, am I writing the character's actual thoughts, in which case it would be in italics, or am I kind of getting close to just kind of writing as the author, but strongly from the character's point of view. And I found myself using the word, yep, this is true, or yep, it really was from them. And as I wrote that, I thought, Vanessa is not going to use the word yep. I'm not sure what word she would use, but it wouldn't be that one. But yeah, that can be a later draft. Hey, let's go back and polish, make sure that our vocabulary fits the character.
And another vocabulary challenge that we're going to face eventually is determining what vocabulary characters are going to use when they have strong emotions. Because we want to be authentic to the experience of strong emotions, but we also have reasons for not wanting to use the same words that many other authors would use to express strong emotions, like curse words, things like that.
Right. Using the name of God, using swear words. I read something from somebody recently, an author, who said that she didn't have any qualms writing swear words in her book, but then when she went to record the audiobook, she found herself having serious problems saying those words herself. And like you said, we want to balance that being authentic to our character with being authentic to who we are. And we don't use those words.
Right.
And we would not feel comfortable recording those words or reading those words if we were to read the book aloud. So we will need to find, like you said, we'll need to find an answer at some point. How do we put words into our characters' mouths that are authentic to how they would respond in a situation, while also being authentic to who we are as the authors?
And that's a challenge, a question we don't really know the answer to yet. It's something we'll have to figure out as we go through this process of writing. But looking back on what we just mentioned there and earlier about being authentic to your character, writing from their perspective in a way that is genuine to who they are, how do you write authentic to your character? What strategies do you use to get into their minds and to make sure that when you write, you're writing from their perspective? Let us know your thoughts down in the comment, and we will see you next week.